Good morning. I greet you in the name of the God of many names. Hamakum is one of those names, the all-encompassing one, the God who neither resides in the world nor is outside of it. It is because this God is with us that we can think about the places we inhabit and how God shows up in those places. It would be interesting to hear from each of you where you've traveled to and where you've lived over the course of your lifetime so far. Some of us have traveled extensively. Some of us have stayed pretty close to home. Some of us have moved to another location, maybe another city, another state, some even into another country. I can say with certainty, movement is important to us. We're used to it. We depend on it, we expect it. In fact, we're dependent on it for our emotional well-being. When our movement is hindered in any way, we feel the loss significantly. We feel like we have lost freedom. This hasn't always been the case, and it's certainly not been the case, nor is it the case for everyone at this time. In our scripture reading this morning, we come upon the people of Israel. Best estimates is about 2 to 3 million at that point. They have escaped or have been driven away from the country of Egypt after enormous pressure was placed on those who were holding them enslaved there. What had begun as a place of refuge for Jacob and his family during the devastating famine during Joseph's time had over the generations become a place of oppression. The people of Israel were dependent on their masters to provide everything for them, and they in turn then also demanded everything. When God taps Moses on the shoulder and gives him the assignment to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt, God self-introduces as, I am who I am. Or this can also be interpreted and mean, I am who you will need me to be. At that time in their history, it wasn't unclear exactly what that was going to mean. We can only imagine God within our experience. And since they were enslaved at that time, they cried to a God to set them free. While they couldn't imagine all of what freedom might mean at that time, they knew what it meant to experience hardships, abuse, oppression, and they wanted out. They had experienced generations of subservience, but in a land of plenty. What did they imagine this freedom could look like? Freedom is a curious thing. We use the word continually, but often without exploring the ramifications of it. When the walls separating East and West Germany crumbled in 1989, all of West Germany, in fact, all of the Western world, exploded in celebration. Finally, the East Germans were free. As years passed, stories tumbled out about the experiences of those who had lived generations under the domination of communism in East Germany. Freedom for them grew to mean disorientation, no assurances of outcomes, no one to plan their schedule, their business, and their lives for them. No one who dictated what they could and they couldn't do. So freedom felt threatening. I wonder if this is similar to the Israelites' experience in the wilderness after leaving their lives of oppression in Egypt. Instead of being able to breathe deeply and relax, it was a place of new challenges and few assurances, a place requiring complete dependence on God. They did not know how to function without another person giving structure and commands and daily provision, whether they liked that provision or not. So it's not surprising that they recall what was familiar. When faced with the new and unknown, it's difficult not to think back to something more comforting, something that's well known, even if it's not desirable. What do they remember? They talk about sitting next to pots of meat and eating bread until they were full. You know how the past turns rosy and wholesome as the years go by. They didn't talk about the forced labor or the ruler commanding that all baby boys be killed at birth. No, they remembered the times of communal feasts and steady provision. Generations prior to this, God promised their ancestors, Abraham and Sarah, abundance. Being in a culture in which history was communicated orally, they most definitely would have heard the stories of how God had promised wealth, land, and prestige. But they could not imagine what that was like. If they recalled those promises now that they found themselves in the wilderness, the dissonance between where they landed and what they had hoped for is palpable. They had thought they would come to promised land, blissful existence, no more worries. So it just didn't fit for them. And they will definitely have made that connection. They did not find peace and plenty and contentment in the wilderness. And I can understand their disillusionment. We can easily be critical of their complaints, but let's remember how easy it is to second guess a decision that lands us in a place of uncertainty, especially when that decision is made by someone else. All they could do was look back with nostalgia to their captivity. Even though what was familiar to them was hard and recurring atrocities, it had become routine, known, and they received regular sustenance. This cynical nature of hardship can be addictive, so they long for meat and bread of Egypt. While we pride ourselves for living in the land of the free, our rights are very important to us. There are parallels to all the places the Israelites inhabited, or promised they would one day inhabit. There are elements of subservience, of wilderness, and a promise where we live too. It may be hard to see on the surface, but let's think about that together and consider, who do we need God to be in these places? I am who I am. I will be who you need me to be, God says. Many of us, too, are dependent on employers for a paycheck, for approval, for vacation time, for access to health care. Some places of employment are pleasant and exhilarating. Some workers' environments are hazardous, to say the least. And I'm thinking of the farm workers working outside in all kinds of conditions to make sure that we have produce on our tables. Our place of residence may not be prescribed per se, but it is influenced by a host of factors outside of our control. With the exception of those who work exclusively online, and that number keeps growing, we're tied to a specific location almost full time. Except for that very low percentage of people who aren't dependent on systems and structures, that is us. Theologian Walter Brueggemann writes, "Fear and anxiety, which disable trust, keep us strangely trapped and tied to the systems that oppress all but the very few on top. We find ourselves identifying with the system, whether we realize it or not. Are we people of Pharaoh or people of God?" End quote. Freeing ourselves from the systems that oppress may seem ludicrous to us in our environment. And yet I wonder how exactly we define freedom and what we expect from it. Some people feel they need to break free from the constraints of a specific location and the expectations of our advanced culture. Some choose to give up all the comforts of a stationary, modern home, and they move into a van and they travel full time. And it's not just people who are retired and travel by RVs who do this. Many times it's young professionals who've decided that they're spending far too much time in an office, or at least they used to. And they find that they're being robbed of time with loved ones, creativity, new experiences, clear skies, fresh air. And all of that does seem kind of appealing right now, doesn't it? If we do manage to break free, we quickly find ourselves in a wilderness. We may not have expected that. We truly expected the bliss and the joy of the promised land. But suddenly, we're faced with all kinds of new threats, stark loneliness, sudden, all-encompassing responsibility for ourselves, our families, our own healthcare premiums, and for income that is solely self-driven. I've read about how treacherous life has become for RVers and van lifers during COVID-19. Campgrounds have been closed, and so they're scrambling to find places to park overnight, to find a place to sleep and a place to shower. For some of us, it's almost unthinkable since we have spent decades deeply embedded in a system. But imagining breaking out of those comforts helps us to understand how lost the Israelites must have felt. Are we freed from confinement or subservience for wilderness? For that place of insecurity? We thought it would look like the abundance and peace of the promised land, but it sure doesn't. So we second guess where we've landed. We may long for the past, nostalgia, where things were not perfect. Well, actually, they might have been oppressive, but they were routine, they were known, they were predictable. Someone else had the final say and full authority. The wilderness requires us to be on our own and to grow up. This may happen early in life. It may happen at retirement, or it may never happen. Growing up is not guaranteed. When I think about the promised land as the Israelites may have understood it, it seems they never really experienced what they may have expected. That place of ownership, belonging, abundance, and peace. Without going into that in any greater depth, because that's a topic all of its own, promised land had its own challenges. It was not easy to attain and was very difficult to defend. I don't know who among us feels that they've reached a modern day promised land, nor what their perception may be of that place. Does it automatically bring contentment or joy? Does the satisfaction of having reached it make up for the new responsibilities and worries? It would have been great to be able to sit down with those Israelites that entered the land of Canaan, their promised land, just to see whether this was what they had envisioned all of these generations. I suspect that their sense of accomplishment would have been somewhat muted, just as it was for people from the former East Germany. The consideration of places we inhabit isn't necessarily geographic, although it surely could be. But for the remaining time we have this morning, let's think about the places in our lives where we experience subservience, maybe even to the point of oppression, wilderness, a place of newness, possibly freedom, and also certainly lack of certainty, and the promised land, abundance and stability, but with newfound threats and maybe even a tinge of now what? There are some distinct commonalities with all three of these places. Each one is new at some point. Each one requires that we adapt and find new ways to function. Each one offers us the opportunity to look honestly at ourselves with our trusted coping mechanisms, our expectations, and also our understanding of God. Each possibility, each place is a classroom and an open meadow, inviting us to look more closely, think more expansively, breathe more slowly and deeply. None of these places is without obstacles. The only place that has no obstacles is the one we hold in our dreams, aspiring to it, not a place we've experienced. Which place are you inhabiting at the moment? It feels like there is new data informing this question all the time. We've had so much new data in the past 6+ months, I think we're facing saturation. Since Friday, with the passing of another national giant, Mother of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, we have yet another weighty loss to add to the place we inhabit. Does subservience or wilderness or promised land describe your inner place? Who do you need God to be in each place? Most importantly, who do you need God to be where you are right now? As we hold on through subservience, that place of little movement, few options, mind-dulling routine, but also a place of solid absolutes. We need God to be our strength, our comfort, our ability to persevere, while also being the God who will grace us with discernment and wisdom. Has this place of subservience become a place we need to leave? When subservience becomes oppression and drains the life out of us and out of the people that we live with, we need to pray, plan, and agitate for exodus. When we find ourselves in a wilderness we do not know, lacking the staples we've come to rely on, having left what seemed like dependable structures, regardless of how deadening, demanding new skills, attitudes, and insights, we need God to be our protection, our creative vision, our hope, our provision, our companion in risk-taking. If we are firmly within or on the cusp of the promised land, the place of arrival, accomplishment, success, sometimes called blessing, we may find the strain on our spiritual life, our mental capacity, our time, the expectations from the outside, even the drain on our finances to be surprisingly stressful. We reach out. We long for God who will give perspective, discernment, peace, and a foundation that is not equivalent to status or achievement. Every place we inhabit invites us to growth. In every place we have an invitation to gratitude. Every place prompts us to hold things in an open hand because it can be gone in a heartbeat. Every place can be embraced as a teacher who flings the door of our souls open, giving us a chance to live in the present. Where are you living right now? In an often smoke-filled environment, worrying about environmental or political eruptions, constricted by the threats of a pandemic, unable to function as you have been up to this point? Is this oppression? Is this wilderness? Has the promised land been snatched away, or has it never been within our grasp? I invite you to ponder the God who said, I will be who you need me to be. Hamakom, the all-encompassing one, the one not bound by physical place, sanctuary, real estate, or precise sociological balance. In other words, the God who isn't intimidated by our mess, our fluctuation, our trial and failure. The God who is moved by our tears, our disappointment, our fears, anxiety, worry, loneliness, moved enough to join us right here. Sometimes silent, other times vibrantly and noticeably present. The God who neither resides in the world nor is outside of it, but whose very being contains the world. When we look outside and see a darkened sun, lingering haze, when we moan under the burden of isolation and loss, when we try to put one foot in front of the other, we call on this all-encompassing one. We hold space for our own and for each other's frailty. We hold on to God's promise to be what we need in any place and at any time that we inhabit it. Amen.